Chapter 8, Inpatient Facilities and Services. Let me figure out how to switch this. Okay, here we go. Boom. All right. Learning objectives are listed on page 315 in the book and on this slide. Continue on this slide. Introduction. I will geek out over this introduction stuff and the history of hospitals and healthcare in general. So I'm going to let you all read that. The cool thing for me is first hospitals were religious institutions or created by religious sectors to provide for the sick. And the first voluntary hospital in the United States is listed as being Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia. I just think that's really cool. So evolution of hospitals is discussed all the way up to page 320. And it's just really interesting information how far we've come compared to the primitive institutions of social welfare to the advanced medical training and research that occurs today. It's cool stuff for me. And we evolve constantly. We will never be perfect. We should reach periods and time frames of medicine where it's great, but it'll never be perfect. There'll always be somebody it does not serve well for different reasons. Okay, so expansion phase of hospitals, healthcare facilities, late 1800s to mid 1980s. There's a lot that happens in between here. So be sure and read the book, some interesting stuff, especially with public health insurance. Sorry, I muted myself to cough. Back up. Instead of talking about health insurance next, let me talk about Florence Nightingale on page 320. And excuse my dogs barking. Florence Nightingale, there's just a small little paragraph there, but oh boy, the history that comes along with that. Be sure and look into that. It's just neat history and how she became um, the nurse that she was. So yeah, and I little favoritism there because I am a nurse. Okay, some key utilization measures and operational concepts. This is all, where am I? Hang on a second. Okay, I'm not too far off. Let me back up one more time. Here we go. Okay, bear with me, guys. Expansion late 1800s to mid 1980s. The public health insurance. To me, this is just kind of puts it in perspective a little bit. All the troubles or all the issues and the growth that we've seen with Medicaid and Medicare. That just came about in 1965. Prior to 1965, there was no public health insurance. So if you think about how young it is, you can kind of understand why it's still such a challenge to deal with and understand and make it the best that it can be. So there's still a lot of work to be done with Medicaid and Medicare, and we'll get there. Pages 322, 323 in the book, the downsizing phase. So from the mid 1980s to the future to currently, we talk about the book talks about shifting from inpatient to outpatient because it's better for folks. It's not necessarily cheaper all the time. There's changes in reimbursements. There are hospital closures that come about, especially if you go back and look at what was happening in the 1990s as far as the war we were involved in and there's different factors. Managed care was something that happened in the 90s. It became a growing force that transformed the delivery of health services in our country. So there's a lot of background of how we got to where we are today. Key utilization measures. This is where I wasn't sure where I was a while ago, but on page 325, the book talks about discharges, inpatient days, average lengths of stays. That continues to get shorter and shorter. When I was a brand new nurse 24 years ago, 25 almost, people who had cataract surgeries had to stay 2 or 3 days. Now you go home within 30 minutes of the surgery. And another example that I can think of is women who had hysterectomies were in the hospital for like a week, and literally it's an outpatient procedure today, the way modern medicine has advanced. Another example of that is having a gallbladder removed. Same thing, patients used to stay in the hospital 5 to 6 days, and now they go home within 45 minutes of that surgery because they do it completely different now. advanced medicine changes how we can do things. Page 328 talks about capacity. Capacity has changed so much. And not only can we serve more patients, but the other side of that is patients come to us a lot sicker because we live longer um, than compared to even 20, 30 years ago. All right, occupancy rate, daily census is rate. You can read about that on page 39. Those tables are great. Ba, ba, ba. Factors that affect hospital employment. This will forever be a topic for any hospital administrator and any of us who work in healthcare, how to retain. It's just always been an issue, and definitely post COVID, it's just getting worse. Read about that. Hospital cost higher. They just get higher and higher for a multitude of reasons. Page 331 talks about the hospital cost, the different types of hospitals. Now, this is something else I get, really excited about. Just because it's neat to know this information, the difference between public hospitals, private nonprofit, and private for profit, the classifications of public access. There's just a lot of great information in this chapter. I'm going to keep going through these slides. Page 336, we talk about general hospitals, specialty hospitals, psychiatric hospitals. By the way, a local hospital system here in North Carolina has requested to open up a mental health hospital. I don't think they call it psychiatric hospitals anymore, but mental health institution. Page 338 in the book talks about rehab hospitals. And rehab hospitals is sometimes the media or television, we think if somebody's going to rehab that it's automatically for something like substance abuse, but not necessarily. A lot of rehab centers, rehab hospitals are for someone who's had a major heart attack and is cardiac rehab, or someone who broke their hip and now you have an orthopedic hip repair type of rehab. So if you ever hear that, you can always clarify what are we talking about. Children's hospitals or specialty, we have a couple in the area. Then we go by length of stay, short term, long term, and you can read about what constitutes those different ones. And then location, swing bed, rural, critical access, because not all hospitals are equal, trust me. And you all, if you are Wilson residents or local to Wilson, Wilmed is not a trauma center. So critical access, I think people either go to Duke, Raleigh, or Greenville for something like that. Type of hospital classifications by size. Yes, that's another important key. The hospital WakeMed that I work for, we have like over 1,000 beds. We're huge. We're a large entity. We're WillMed. Ooh, I know I want to say it's less than 200, but I'm not sure. It's been a couple years since I worked inside that hospital, so I can't remember. Great hospital, by the way. 340, 341 in the book. Teaching hospitals, that's an entirely different classification. Not profit, if hospital's non-profit, there's a lot of tax breaks with that. They can still make a profit. They still have to make some type of profit to stay open, but they're tax exempt. Management concepts. Let me get caught up in the book. Okay, management concept starts on page 344, learning about hospital governance, because a hospital does have to self-govern. The U.S. the federal government does not step in necessarily unless there's an issue. Actually, they don't govern; they just shut hospitals down if they have to. So the hospital has their own governing bodies. The board of trustees are the governing body that is ultimately responsible, legally responsible for the operations of the hospital. And then underneath them is a chief executive officer, the medical staff. Um, you can read all about that. Licensure, certification, and accreditation on page 347. Now we're getting into some important stuff. Our hospitals want to be deemed joint commission accredited or approved, passed. That's where these auditing agencies will come into the actual hospital and they'll pick up a chart and they'll ask a nurse or a doctor or nursing assistant or physical therapist, how do you do this and why and where can I find this policy? And I mean, you need to know your stuff. You need to be able to answer it. We practice this type of stuff to make sure we are on our game and know how to provide these auditors with this type of information because we want to be the best of the best. We want to provide excellent outcomes. And magnet recognition is a huge deal in the hospital world. You want to be a magnet hospital. Most of the time, you have better outcomes. You have better nurses. It's easier to retain and recruit nurses if you are a magnet hospital because you get paid a little bit more too. So, but ultimately, it's about the outcomes. Ethical and legal issues in patient care, page 349. There's so much to this paragraph. The principle of respect, principle of benevolence, um, I said that wrong, thinking about the other one. But fidelity, this is important that uh, we well, it's autonomy too. We allow our own patients to have a voice in their care. And if someone refuses something or declines, as long as they're within mental capacity to make this type of declinations, we document and we move on. But fidelity is important for nurses, doctors, surgeons, anyone who's taken an oath that we have to perform our duty just because somebody is different than us or um, maybe doesn't have the ability to pay, etc., we still have a right to perform our duty and take care of that person. And then it goes into legal rights, DNR, living will, durable power of attorney. Those are all important. The big thing about these type of orders and having these documents in place, everybody over the age of 18 needs these, by the way. Everybody, for legal reasons, but it doesn't cover everything, every single situation. It's impossible to. There's something that will come up where the ethics board will meet on, what's best for the next step. But it's great to have your wishes in writing. I'll say it again, everybody over the age of 18 needs to have a living will and a durable healthcare power of attorney for sure, just for somebody to make those type of decisions for you in case you cannot. And then the last slide is summary that can be found on page 351. Please let me know if you have any questions about this material.